there's a lot of conspiracy. And when I saw this, like I'm familiar with the conspiracy. And so I was like, oh, I know what's going to happen with this. And it's funny. I thought that everyone else knew all of this stuff about the conspiracy. And so I put together, like I woke up early with a headache and I was in pain. And I was like, well, what do I do to keep my mind occupied? And so I was like, I'm just going to make a poorly worded tweet that kind of like summarizes all this stuff together. And I had a bunch of typos, like how embarrassing. And despite that, it went super viral with 1.5 million views is what it's up at. And I can't edit anything.
1.6, actually.
1.6, yeah.
Let's pull it up. So how long were you chewing on this theory?
Pretty much for a day.
Okay.
Sometimes I get these theories and it's not appropriate to release them, and then it becomes time appropriate. Like I've got some other tweets that I'm going to do, like chains, but it's not the appropriate time right now. But I just caught it at the amazing time, and then I started seeing everyone like it, and I was like, oh, this might become super viral. Look at that, 8,056 likes.
This is great. Okay. Walk us through this here. So you're basically saying there's more than meets the eye here. I've seen a few other theories like, oh, maybe these people faked their own death so they could start a new life somewhere. Maybe the guy and his son wanted to get away from mom. Who knows?
Yeah. So let's kind of like give a little background to what's going on. Like there's a conspiracy surrounding the Titanic. A lot of people that are kind of waking up right now realize that whenever the media repeats something over and over and over again, like get your booster, like vaccines are safe and effective, like there's something going on, right? And one of the things that they do is that they say, oh, an iceberg sank the Titanic. Like they make movies about it. They want to push it through your head. And there's this conspiracy theory with actually it's probably true. Like I 100% believe in it, but I want to be a little bit skeptical so that people know that this is alleged and there's a lot of coincidences that line up and point to this being true. But it turns out that what is true is that there were 4 people on that Titanic that were all against the Federal Reserve. And you can scroll down a little bit to see their names. And they were all against the creation of the Federal Reserve. John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidore Strass, and George Dunton Woodine, and they all died on this fateful voyage.
So Guggenheim, like the museum guy,
and
Jacob Astor, I think he helped to build New York in some way. I don't know. They named a street after him in New York.
Right. City. And one of them was like the founder of Macy's or something, like Macy's, right? So these are really powerful individuals. And what's interesting is that they were all supposed to go on this ship with J.P. Morgan. And at the last minute, J.P. Morgan, he missed the boat. Oh, I missed the boat. Da, 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 da. But other people, it's come out.
He slept in. His alarm didn't go off.
Something like that. And others were supposed to go on that boat, but then they got messages, don't go on this boat, like in capital letters, whatever. And so they didn't go on the boat. And the boat ends up crashing. Right now, we've heard the maxim that jet fuel can't melt steel beams, right? And what's interesting is that what isn't really popular yet is this idea that an iceberg can't rip through a hardened steel icebreaker class ship. Like this Titanic did not have a weak hull. The hull of carbon steel was 1 inch thick. That's 26 millimeters. An ice class breaker ship is 25 millimeters to 75 millimeters. So clearly this Titanic, and that's the reason why they called it unsinkable. This Titanic ship was in the league of an icebreaker class ship. Now, these icebreaker ships, they want to go through surface ice. And the thing about surface ice is that surface ice gets really cold, where icebergs sitting in the water don't get cold. Why? Because water sitting, in the Arctic when there's ice around is about 32 degrees. And when the air outside gets colder, the water doesn't actually change temperature. It actually undergoes phase change. So that means that it turns to ice and absorbs that energy, or vice versa. If it warms up, that water, changes back. with
for
water.
the retards listening, it's like basically the ice in your drink is not as cold as as just a bunch of ice frozen like together
Right,
on land or
like
something
that
like that.
surface ice right there.
Yeah.
That can get down to like -40, right? And the
Okay.
ice and the ship is supposed to break through that. But the ice that's underwater is it's basically falling apart. It's not it doesn't hold together well. But what the narrative is supposed to have us believe is that this underwater, iceberg ripped through hardened steel and sank the Titanic. And then there was a bunch of explosions on the ship. And once I started looking into this, I actually found some primary sources. I can't find them now because everything on the search engines is screwed. But there were accounts that that the iceberg theory was wrong. That it was actually just an explosion that happened on the ship, and that's what sank the ship. And so I started looking into sort of corollaries that could also be true. And what I found was this article by the Smithsonian that said that actually there could have been an undetected slow burning coal fire 2 weeks prior to the collision with the iceberg, right?
Interesting.
Right. So now they're actually, yeah, coal fire may have, that's actually from the Smithsonian. That's not just some random blog. And so now they're kind of coming out. They're kind of seeding this narrative with this limited disclosure, like, hey, there might have actually been a fire. And piecing this all together, I've come to the conclusion that, yeah, this was a piece of sabotage to kill the opponents of the Federal Reserve. They don't want people to go down there because what they're going to find is, and this has actually already been disclosed before, that it doesn't look like an iceberg ripped through the hole. It's actually like an explosion, and the hole is bowed out.
Why
And
would they not want people to know that there was an explosion on board the Titanic?
well, think about it. If there's an explosion on the Titanic, why was there an explosion on the Titanic? What could have ripped out 1 inch of hardened steel and blown it out so that the thing sank, right? And then that starts giving credence to this, like, who was on that ship that died. And it starts to lead back. And the end of the path on this is that it was an act of sabotage by the central bankers of the world in order to create the Federal Reserve, and they wanted to get rid of their opposition so that they could ramrod it through on Christmas Eve.
Was
I
this
think
their only opposition? These four guys who
these are the big fish.
Mhm.
These are the big fish, right? And everything surrounding the Federal Reserve is really shady. Like, it was created on December 24th without a proper quorum in Congress. Like, everyone went home thinking that the debate on the Federal Reserve was done. And then when they went home, they went, just kidding. We're actually going to create the Federal Reserve. And so the foundation of the Federal Reserve is actually built on fraud. And fraud vitiates everything. So, if you take the logical extension of that, all the taxes, all the loans, everything where we owe them $32 trillion could be argued, in a non-rigged court system that it's all based on fraud. It didn't have proper congressional procedure to get through. So
What is the point of the Federal Reserve?
the Federal Reserve took over the printing presses of the United States. So before, the money used to be printed out of the Treasury, owned by the government. But then the Federal Reserve was created along with the IRS, in which the responsibility to print all the money was handed off to to a corporation. Now, the Federal Reserve, people think, oh, well, that's the Federal Reserve. It's federal, it's a government. No, it's a private entity with stocks held by stockholders that pays a yearly dividend. When they make money, they do not go and reach into the purses of their depositors like a regular bank does. They literally print the money out of thin air, loan it to the government, and then the government uses it to fund its operations. And so because they're...
Or like a war in Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. And so the problem, I mean, look, if the federal government was just printing money out of thin air, I mean, that's great. You don't have to pay that back. But the problem with the Federal Reserve is that every single time they inflate the money supply, they put that on the balance sheet and they say, oh, you're going to have to pay us back. Even though we created this money out of nothing, we're going to have to pay it back someday. Now, here's the problem with that whole thing. Once the money supply inflates, you can't pay it back. Like, you know, let's say that the money supply has expanded by 20 times since 1913. Maybe it's even more, maybe it's 100 times, right? So we owe so much money for the printing of this money that if we were to ever attempt to pay it back, the debt would absorb so many dollars in the system that we would have reverse inflation or deflationary event all the way back to, you know, 1/20th of what the money is to pay it off. That would basically mean that everyone's portfolios, houses, assets would all depreciate, and it would be like a Great Depression times 20. And so the only way going forward is that we had to borrow more and more money. And the media was responsible. They would tell the American public that our entire inflationary cycle is being driven by a bunch of central bankers that have no allegiance to this country, that are only trying to, like, we owe them $33 trillion. Like, it's a huge problem. Like, we owe them $33 trillion. And so the globalists that run this don't want us to, you know, start figuring this out, and they don't want people going down to the Titanic. Now, you may ask yourself, well, why were people going down to the Titanic? Well, it's really interesting. If you go down and look in this thread, I point out that it was none other than the Rothschild dynasty that funded this whole operation. Okay, keep on going down, keep on going down. Boom, David D. Rothschild, entrepreneur and environmentalist, joins OceanGate Incorporated board of directors. You can't make this stuff up, all right? Now, people have this idea, because the media is not telling them everything that's going on, is that they think, oh, I could have just gone down there, you know, hired a sub, commissioned a sub, gone down there and looked at the Titanic myself, or gone a drone. No, that's not true. Since 2000, I think between 2021, or maybe it was even earlier, it was signed into law that by treaty that the United States, Canada, UK, and other countries in the Western world agreed to make the Titanic off limits unless you had special permission granted by one of the regulatory agencies. I think it's like the NOAA.
Yeah, here we go. 2012, I think.
So no, so in 2012, the UNESCO Cultural Heritage Site became a thing, but it wasn't ratified. And it was then ratified, was it Pompeo? I think Pompeo ratified it. And so what they're doing is that they're giving this treaty teeth to make it off limits, but it's been off limits since, you know, for at least 3 years. So the question is, you know, it's already protected. If you're a U.S. citizen, you can't go down there without a special permit. And so this regulatory body granted OceanGate a permit to go down to the Titanic, despite the fact that the submarine was an experimental design. The fact that no submarine certification company would certify it. The fact that there weren't experienced pilots piloting this thing, and that it was controlled by a freaking PlayStation 4 game controller. Like it's unbelievable, right? And so it's like, it's this big giant hole where, you know, people think, oh, you can just go down there. No, there's a regulatory body, and the Rothschilds funded this operation in order to create the most laughably unsafe method of going down to the Titanic.
Wow. So it sounds like the Rothschilds wanted this to fail, wanted these people to die and have an excuse so that no one would ever try to go visit it again.
That's right. And in fact, I even predicted, I said, after this is done, after the people are discovered dead, the media is immediately going to go around and say, how could we allow this to happen? And now today, Friday, June 23rd, it's happening. Keep on going down. We'll see. Let's see what the next part says, right? So, look, the Reuters. All trips to the site should be stopped until the cause of the OceanGate expedition submersible failure is determined. Right? Now, we know that nothing is more permanent than a temporary order. And the thing is that they don't even need to create new laws. Like the law's already been signed, or the treaty's been signed. The regulatory bodies are already there. The whole thing's ready to go. So their calls for, stopping this, like all the relevant pieces are already in place. All they have to do is just say, nope, we're going to cut off anyone else from going down there and looking at this Titanic wreckage.
And this is Michael Gillian, who knows who he's owned by. But yeah.
I mean, people are fame whores, right? Like, you get a scientist and you're like, hey, well, what are your thoughts on this? We might want to interview you. And they'll go on, they'll say anything, especially if they're kind of a leftist, whatever, that will go along with the narrative. So, I'm sure they'll have no shortage of scientists that will see this opportunity to get on TV, and they'll go and shill, kind of like Peter Hotez for the vaccine. They'll go and shill for shutting down all future travel. Now, the shutting down of the travel will only happen for those that have signed this UNESCO treaty. That means the Western world. China, Russia, they can go and they can conduct salvage operations. They can go down and do exploration operations. Like, this ship is clearly in international waters in which it's the rule of the high seas, which is basically kind of anything goes, with some protocols on how you're supposed to do things. So
I saw Pirates of the Caribbean. I know how it works. Yeah.
Right. So, we may get, disclosure on this someday. Maybe it'll come from, the Chinese, maybe it'll come from the Russians, maybe it'll come from Iran. I don't know.
It sounds like they're specifically just trying to keep Americans from poking around there, or did it just work out that way?
I think they're trying to keep Americans, Canadians, British from going down there. They don't want this fraud to be discovered. I think what we're going to do is we're going to continue to see, because look, there's a lot of risk. Like, China can just come out there and say, oh, it turns out that there was an explosion, like the thing was rigged and we found dynamite residue, 100 years later. And so I think what we're going to continue to see is the the Smithsonian, the sort of like the official narrative generation centers come out and explore this theory that there was undetected coal fire, which is kind of the theory that they've allowed to get out. And they're gonna say, well, maybe the boilers actually exploded a little bit earlier than we thought, right? Because if you remember,
they're trying to tease out the idea of a different kind of explosion, an explosion that could conceivably happen that wasn't, made to happen on purpose, which seems to be the case.
Right. Like, and they're already doing this, right? And like in the movie Titanic, they made a special effort to point out that the boilers exploded, right? And so they're already saying that there was a huge explosion on the Titanic. But I believe, in my theory, that they are moving the time frame so that one happens after the other when it's actually reversed. Like, they say that it hit an iceberg and then the boilers exploded as the ship was going down. But in reality, that boiler is a cover story for the dynamite that was placed, or maybe it was a submarine that blew it out from, externally.
Wow.
But they're using that boiler as a cover story so that at least the information is getting out there, but they're coloring it in such a way that people think it happened after the iceberg busted up the ship.
Jesus. Wow. And so there's a post here from Derek Bros. You're being misled about the submarine. They did not hear taps and attempts to rescue. And the attempts to rescue has resulted in catastrophic failure, implosion of two submersibles to rescue. The media wants you tuned into their fake ass broadcasts. The sub is gone, according to sources that have contacted me for Canadian and U.S. Coast Guard insiders. So they had us believing that we were hearing taps, just a few days ago.
Yeah. And Derek got on the stream, like I listened to a Twitter space, and he came in there and he said it was either him or another person that was also had knowledge of this. And what they said was that they had listened to the supposed audio of the tapping, and it did not sound like people tapping on the outside. It sounded like two tectonic plates slowly rubbing against each other through slow movement, and that when tectonic plates move, they make a regular sound. And that's what he thought that it was. And so, the media jumped on this, said, oh, they're alive. And they're like, you got this thing like, help us,
Oh my
help us.
God. We're running out of phone battery. We need iPhone chargers.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're under what, 5,000 PSI, the amount of pressure underneath that far of the ocean is just absolutely mind-boggling. People think, oh, space, it's like, there's no pressure out there, there could be a leak or whatever. That's nothing compared to being 5,000 feet under the ocean. If there's
Wow.
any leak whatsoever, that leak will shoot like a bullet into the vessel, fill it up with water, and then you won't even die from suffocation. You'll die from the pressure of the vehicle as soon as it fills up with liquid. Like, that's how intense it is down there.
Yeah. There's also a theory from Brett here that no one died in the sub. Research the Terramar project. It's always the same criminals involved. So is it even a possibility that there were no people here on the sub at all?
Yeah.
And this is all just a big setup.
Yeah, it's 100% possible that there's not even anybody in there. It was all set up for Hollywood, and it was set up to run this operation. That would be a cleaner sort of like operation, because then you don't have a bunch of people asking questions and suing the organization. Because like, once a family member dies, like, the other family members go, what exactly happened? And so they become obsessed, and they research this thing, and then they make statements to the press because they discover all these things. So maybe they were all fictional characters that went down to the sub, and then they imploded the sub, and then and now the supporting evidence for it being all made up is the U.S. blocked other countries from investigating this, and the UK was blocked, and so they wanted a tight lock. Now, it can be said that the reason why they did that is because they wanted to keep this fraud up, that they were still alive, to cover up the IRS whistleblower testimony against Hunter Biden and the investigation. So that's one theory. But another thing is that they didn't want the salvage crews to go down there and say, hey, there's no dead bodies, which is a possibility. So, who knows? If people wanted to get interested and research this, the way that they could do it is they could find out, like, take the names, find out the individual people, like the family members, and then start searching them through social media profiles and see what their response is, right? Because like this has a lot of media attention. There's a non-zero chance that the family members are going to, go out there and publicly air their mourning, and then a funeral. And if that happens, then it's real. But sometimes when I've done this, let's just say things get really spooky. So I'm going to say that this is a real theory. I haven't gone and fact checked it, but it would be interesting if someone does do that to let me know what the results are. I may or may not, post about it. I think a lot of people, like, if the whole thing is just like made up, that's almost like going too far for a lot of people, right? It's like outside, like, I feel like the conspiracy Overton window has expanded to the point where we could say, oh, they don't want us to like discover the explosion. But going outside of that and saying, oh, the whole thing's actually made up, like, I feel that that's actually going into dangerous territory, and I'll endorse it one way or the other.